Hi, I'm Paul Offord, Mike Zero Papa X-Ray Oscar, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some work I've been doing on a concept called microblogging. And I've done some proof of concept work, and I just want to present where we're up to and just give you my thoughts on it so far. So here's our agenda. We'll start off by talking about the concept. If you've watched any earlier videos, you'll be familiar with this particular bit of the presentation, but I wanted to make sure that you could look at this as a standalone sort of video. Then we're going to look at the typical configuration of a station that's delivering microblogs. We'll then do a quick demonstration of the solution as it stands at this time. Then I'll give you my view on what I've discovered, the issues I think that have arisen, and then we'll look at some possible solutions to those things. And I've added this on the end because this is I don't know whether it's radical, but it's a bit different. At the moment, all of the JS8Call activity is centered around station call signs. And I believe that we would achieve much more if we can abstract away from station call sign per se and put another naming convention over the top, which I'll explain a bit later. And then we'll talk about next steps. Where do we go from here? So this wasn't my idea. Julian OH8STN came up with the idea. Julian has a particular interest in emergency comms and off-grid communication. So what he said was it would be really good if an amateur radio operator could create short blog posts and store them in the file system of their computer, and then other operators could request copies of those blogs. So request a listing of all the blogs that are available, or the blog posts that are available, and then actually retrieve a specific post. And he did propose, I think he proposed two different data communication methods, but one of them was JS8Call, and I was quite interested in the JS8Call approach, so that's the one I picked up on. As he pointed out, the model should be decentralized, so anyone can serve up microblogs, and it definitely needs to work without the internet being available. Obviously, in an emergency comms situation, there's no guarantee the internet will be available. He suggested that requests should be able to be directed to specific stations with running their particular blog, or to the all-call address. Now, I haven't gone down the all-call route. I think it's problematic, but I have focused at the moment on directed requests to a specific station. As he pointed out, this should extend the capability of JS8Call. We don't want to have to write a program that does all of the encoding and decoding and does all of the basic nuts and bolts of running JS8 when we've got a perfectly good solution, which is JS8Call. So this is a typical configuration for the solution as I envisaged it. And in fact, this is the configuration of the solution that I use. So we have a microblog client, which is simply JS8Call, nothing more, nothing less. And we just type in particular formats of message into the outbound message box. And then we're feeding it in the normal way through my 7200. I'm running these side by side on a desk through dummy loads, so I've just got the dummy loads sitting close to each other to give me that sort of air-gapped communication to the Elecraft. Then from the Elecraft into another copy of JS8 running on my desktop machine, and then we have a small microblog server, which is just a really small piece of Python. I think it's about 500 lines of code. The microblog server connects to JS8Call via its API. So there is an API. You can access it using TCP or UDP, and I'm using TCP. So in operation, we type in a command into the microblog client that then is sent as a request through the two radios, through JS8Call and into the microblog server. The microblog server then responds with the blog, or a listing of the blogs. And the blogs are just kept in a directory on the server. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this with Python is quick and easy to develop code with Python, but also it's portable between platforms. So this should run on a Raspberry Pi, on your MacBook, or on a Windows machine without any changes. He says in his naive way, but that's what it should do. Okay, so let's have a quick demo of the solution. Right, before we start on the demo, let me show you just some configuration parameters. So this is in the single file, Python file, mbserver.py, and you'll find a section close to the top. You can see it's line 27, and we have some configuration parameters. So very quickly through these. This is the local host address and the TCP port number that JS8Call is listening on. That's the default for JS8Call. Capabilities, this is a string that's sent during the announcement phase in the microblog announcements, which we'll see in a second. It simply means that this particular server supports listing, extended listing, and GET requests. There could be other potential requests in the future, such as uploading posts to the server. So this just gives us an idea of the capabilities. Do we want to send announcements? True if we do, false if we don't. How often are we going to send announcements? Well, in this case, once every 300 seconds or 5 minutes. And what languages are we using on this microblog? English GB. Now you can have a list of languages. We'll talk later about the size of the MB announcement message, and I do have some concerns in this area. So this is all very experimental. There's some levels of logging. You can go quite verbose. You can run it in a debug mode, and then you can have something that outputs just about everything. So it's quite extensive logging. And then we've got, where do the posts reside? What's the directory? When you're using Windows, you have to use this double backslash to escape the backslash character. I believe forward slashes will work even in Windows actually now, but I'm not certain. So, but you could experiment with that. When you do post listing, we could run it without a limit, which means that if you had, say, a microblog site which had 1,000 posts on it and you did a listing from the start, you're going to get 1,000 entries in the listing, and that is probably going to take hours to transmit. So at the moment we're running with a limit of 5. This is just something to, in an attempt to sort out a problem there is with the new line character in JS8Call. Actually, I'm not sure it's needed any longer, but we'll come on to that. And then we've got a revision number for this level, this particular version of the code, which I've added so that we can keep, so that you know whether you're running the latest version or not. Okay, now let's start it. I'm doing this all within PyCharm, but you can do this from the command line. You don't need PyCharm to do all of this. PyCharm is just my IDE. Okay, so you can see the server's started, it's revision 5, it's connected to JS8Call, and it's already sending out an announcement. So the announcement is announcing the grid location, the capabilities that we saw earlier, the latest blog number, 29, and the latest blog date. and then the language is supported, or not supported, the language is used in this site. So you could have a mixed language site, so you might have, say, ENGB and then whatever the one is for French, FR whatever. Yeah, sorry, I can't remember. And ES for Spain, and you know, it's the languages that are within RFC 5464, I think, or it's in an RFC anyway. I do refer to it in the in my GitHub README document. So in fact the README document is just here. I could open that up. It's not very pretty like this, but where is it? We should be able to find the it's not telling me. Oh yeah, there it is. RFC 5646 language region. Okay, so that neatly brings me on to the GitHub repository where the code is kept. Now, if you don't use Git for version control, don't worry. You don't have to use it. It's just this is the way I sort of manage my code. So now let's switch over to my client machine, because we're going to be using this in a second. And you can see I'm at github.com/Paul Offord/MB server. I'm running this as in private, because then it won't log me in, and I'm showing you exactly what you'll see. Now the important thing here is there's some pretty extensive notes here for the server. A list of all the supported commands, server announcement information, how do you create a post file and how should you store it, how do you install the code in the first place, notes on running the actual server. Not quite sure why that's got a strike through there. That's probably because I've used the wrong markup, but this is just something that seems to be an issue, but I haven't bottomed it out. And then references to various videos. This one will be included in this list now as well. Okay, so how do you get the code? Well, if you're used to using Git, you'll know that you can just do a git clone and clone the repository and then work from there. And then the benefit of that is that whenever you want to check for an update, you can just do a git pull and it will pull the latest code. Oh, by the way, I'm not using branches at the moment. I'm just pushing everything into the main trunk of the Git repository. If you aren't into Git and what I've just said just then is just a load of gobbledygook to you, don't worry. All you've got to do, download this zip file. In the zip file, you'll find all the files you need. And oh, I forgot I'd got this. And there's the mbserver.py. Let's just zoom in there a bit. So there's the server itself, and in this posts file you'll find sample blog posts. Just saves you having to create a load. So there you've got them, and they are just plain text files. The format of the header must have this number, it must then have a date, and then you can do put whatever you like after that. If I open up one of these, you can see that it's got this stick word wrap on. Whoops. Yeah, you can see that, you know, it's just got very basic information, and that's what's sent to you. If I were to do a get for blog 20, I would see all of that text. In fact, that's what we're going to do in just a sec. Okay, so now let's go around into JS8Call. You'll see here that I've got this set up to direct all of my messages to M0PXO, that's to the blog server, just by selecting that. So that's perfectly permissible on the client side. On the server side, you must not have it directed. So you have to deselect M0. You've got to have it running like that on the server side. If you don't have it running like that, it gets all messed up. So that's just something I've raise that as an issue later in this presentation. But in this case, we're on the client side. So let's try a couple of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try a listing to list everything that is later than 2023/01/17. Now I'm going to speed up the video at this point because I don't want you to have to wait for this to be sent and received. Now if we just flip over to the server for a second, you can see here that it's then sent out a couple of announcements while I was chatting, but then we've received the ML command and we've started to send a response. You don't see the text unless you increase the logging level to level 2. If you increase the logging level to level 2, you would see all of the text that's being sent, but to cut down on the stuff being sent into the log, by default we run in level 1. Something else while we're sending I should explain. You'll find in the on the readme page, I need to update it actually, it says mb.lst is the command, and then I changed it to mb.l, and now I'm just using m.l. All of those variations of this command are supported in the server. The reason that I'm trying to reduce the count here, I'm sure you can appreciate, is I'm trying to make it go faster. So I'm trying to use shorter commands. But having said that, I don't want them to be so short that, well, two things: they're impossible to understand, and secondly, that they're not unique, and so people sending other types of messages to the same station, their messages start to get processed as microblog requests. So there's a balance to be struck here. Okay, now back on the client, you can see that it's listed the output quite successfully. Okay, so let's now try and get one of these blog posts. So m.g, let's get 25. Just hopping back over here onto the server for a second, you'll notice that we're still sending the response to the get for blog 25, and in the meantime the server has sent an announcement message. Now, although it looks as though it's been sent, it won't get transmitted. In fact, JS8Call seems to just drop the message. If it's busy processing something else outbound, it will just drop the message, and that will never go. But the obviously these are on a timer. You can see it's on the 5-minute timer if you look between these two times here, and so it will be sent again in 5 minutes time, assuming that nothing else is being sent at that time. If we just jump back to the client now, so we're jumping around a bit, you notice how this is going wrong. It's started to complete this paragraph and then it's jumped above and started to put text into here. We'll see in a second that that will get itself sorted out at the end of the message, but this is a slightly quirky aspect of sending via JS8Call and seems to be related to new line characters. Okay, so you can see now that the message is completed and it's reformatted itself back to how it should be. So you can see what it did look like above, but now we see it completely formatted correctly. Now, one of the questions is, what about the date of these posts? So I wanted to know what date post 29 was sent. I can use a different sort of listing command. So m.e, and this will work with any sort of criteria like greater than a certain date or whatever. But in this case, I'm just going to look at the entry for post 29. Okay, so you can see that that post was actually created on January 27th. Right, I think that's enough for the demo for the moment. There are lots of different combinations of the commands, but there are only 3 commands basically: listing, which is L, extended listing, which is E, and get, which is G. So you can have a play with those and look at the README file to get an idea of what they do. So I want to talk now about the observations and issues. So the first thing is, at the moment, the solution is a bit quirky. One thing is that the outgoing message box mustn't be in directed mode. So if you've gone to the station list on the right hand side of JS8Call and selected a station so that all of your commands in JS8Call are directed to that station, that totally messes this solution up. The announcement mechanism doesn't work properly, because instead of it starting with @MB, it starts with the call sign that you're directing it to, and then it has @MB, and so it just doesn't get sent to a group. Okay, a second problem is that there is an idle timer, which times out after 60 minutes by default. And it seems that to re-trigger the idle timer, you need to put keyboard entries, or you need to type into the outbound message box. Sending messages via the API does not seem to reset the idle timer. So that means that when you're using it after 60 minutes, you have to make sure you go to the server and click the OK button, because not only does it give this idle timeout pop-up message, it stops working at that point. But as soon as you click OK, it all starts working again. So that's a bit of an issue, particularly as some people have contacted me talking about having this running unattended in a forest for like days. Well, that's not going to work. I think we've got to look at ways over that. You can set the idle timer to 1440 minutes, which is 24 hours, but that's the maximum setting. So that's a bit of an issue. As the posts are being received at the client end, they look corrupt as they're being received, and you probably saw this in the demonstration. Once they're fully received, JS8Call rewrites the message and it all comes out okay. So that's just a bit of a nuisance, but you know, not a showstopper. We're sending quite long messages here, which means they're occupying very many frames. And you know, some of these transmissions are taking 5 minutes. Frame loss is going to be an issue. You can imagine if you've got marginal reception, then you know, frame loss is quite likely. I'll suggest a way around this problem in a minute, but that I think is going to be quite a big issue. Of course, you know, if we're sending lots of data over a very slow link, which is, you know, particularly if we're running in normal mode in JS8Call, it has a big impact on, you know, the time we have to wait for the answer, the time we have to wait for the result from our message. I don't think there's a way around it. Not ultimately. There are some things we can do. But one of the problems is you could make it a lot more cryptic, in particular in the command that you send from the client to the server, but that doesn't make it very usable. And there's definitely a trade-off between usability, probably as well as functionality and speed. And it's going to be interesting for us to figure out where's the line we should tread on that. The MB announcements as they are right now take too long. I think they take, in normal mode, they take about 90 seconds, I think. Now, if we, particularly on the timer for the announcements, which is 5 minutes by default, is what I've set it to. If we're going to spend 90 seconds sending it, and then you're probably only going to get one message between the announcement and the next announcement. So I think the timer's got to be increased to probably something like 10 minutes, and also the announcements have got to be shortened. So we just need to figure out what's essential in the announcement. You can have a problem with clash of incoming requests, so maybe multiple requests are hitting the microblog server at the same time. Something's going to get lost. And what's more, which I think I point out in the next bullet, the user who made the request that is lost is not even warned that the request has been lost. So I think that's a bit of an issue. You can get clashes where you try and send a command, get post 24 to the server, and the server's already delivering up the response to a prior request. Now, this is a single radio. It's either transmitting or it's receiving. It's not full duplex. So, of course, that incoming request just isn't heard. And so that's an issue. Similarly with, sending out the microblog announcements. If it's sending an announcement and you send a request at the same time, that's going to get missed. And then if you are going to use the standard JS8Call message box at the same time as the server's running, you're going to have the potential for clashes between requests that you're sending from your via the interactive outgoing message box with incoming requests to your microblog server. So these are some of the things that I think we've got to consider regarding, just these clashing of requests. As I said, when you get a clash, the requester doesn't even get a warning message to say the request wasn't received. There still is the issue of amateur radio regulations. Now, the guy who sent the message about running it in a forest unattended, it could be that in that country that's quite permissible. My understanding in the UK is that you should be attending even if you've got a machine that's automatically responding. I don't know what that does for things like Whisper and some of these other facilities like FT8, auto responding, etc. Yes, I have a feeling that the regulations are a bit behind the technology, and maybe as operators we're all bending the regulations a bit, but hey, I don't know, that's a bit beyond my knowledge. There's a further issue in terms of developing this solution further. I've had quite a lot of time to do this, but I have another passion and my other passion is motor racing, and the season starts at the end of April, and from the end of April through to about the end of October I'm going to be pretty busy with my car and going to testing and going to meetings, etc., which means that, if this was going to get serious, like people were expecting support for bug fixes, etc., I might have a challenge. So if we want to go further with this, I may have to enlist the help of other people to help develop this. Okay, I said I'd talk about potential solutions. So on the issue of frame loss, I believe with a client program, and this all assumes a client program, which I've started to sort of look at, but I haven't got very far with it, but I will post an update on the client side at a later stage. But if we have got a client program, then we could actually operate a loss detection and correction mechanism. It wouldn't be too difficult to do that. For speed, with the client program, I'm definitely plan to use very short commands. They can be as cryptic as you like, of course, because the user will never see them. This one here, for example, that I'm showing could be send me an extended listing for anything later than 2023 February the 3rd. And I happen to know I've experimented with that, and you can send that in a single frame. So that's a 15-second transmission at normal speed. We could tokenize common words. It's going to we'll have to have something like a dialect version, because as we add to the dictionary of tokenized words, we're going to have stations that support some versions of the dictionary and stations that support other versions of the dictionary. And we're going to want them to be backward compatible, otherwise it's going to turn into a real nightmare with everybody trying to keep everything completely up to date and in sync. So we'd have to have a dialect mechanism, but I don't think I've seen that used in computer networking, so I don't think that's a big deal. Compaction is like tokenizing common words, but you just do it on the fly. So you would analyze the outgoing message, look for some common words, and then send one, but with it tagged with a token, and then all further occurrences of that word just use the token. Now, you could do it on repeated strings, but I don't think I'm that clever. So I think it might have to be on completed words. The reason I say this is because you're going to have to parse, you're going to have to split the sentences up. And if you're splitting them up into words, it's pretty easy to do that because you just use space or full stop or comma as the split value, you know, or question mark or whatever. Splitting it up into strings is a lot more tricky. The other thing which somebody did point out to me was auto modes, automatically switching between modes. So this could be based on the signal level received. Maybe we could have some intelligence in the client that says, well, if if we've got a receive value of 7 dB, then maybe we can run at turbo or something, you know. The next thing, size of the MB announcement. I think we need to cut that down. I went a bit overboard with that. I mean, I love the idea of having things like language and whatnot in there, but I'm not sure we can do that really. It would be great if you could get the announcement into a single frame. So maybe we need to think about that. Dealing with clashing with other requests. Well, one thing we could do is add logic that monitors the band activity for a particular server that you want to send to, and only sends when there's no activity being seen, so there's a quiet spot. That won't eliminate all clashes because of course two people could jump in at the same time. You could do things like add a randomized delay, which is similar to what you do with, say, Ethernet, but I don't know, that's something to discuss, I guess. The other one, which is a little more radical, is to run dual radios. So maybe have an SDR for the receive side, and then your Icom 705, is it, the new Icom? Anyway, you know, have an ordinary transceiver for the transmit side. Certainly in terms of the blog server, it would have to be rewritten slightly. Might have to get into multi-threading, which multi-threading with Python, I believe it can be done, but I'm not particularly au fait with it. But we could do that. But the other thing, of course, is JS8Call would have to run two different lots of rig control. And the audio inputs would be okay. I think you'd be able to switch between the audio inputs and outputs, so you could have those split, but it's the rig control I think that might be a problem. You can't run two copies of JS8Call at the moment. It comes up with an error if you try, so it's worth looking into. Does mean that you're now moving beyond just somebody with a small station running a blog server. The reason I'm interested in this particular area is because you could imagine in an emergency situation, everybody is going to pile in, you know, and I think it could end up with totally swamping the meager amount of bandwidth that's available, particularly when you're looking at the speeds at which it takes to send messages. So I think there is a consideration there. In terms of you not being warned that you've lost a message due to a clash, you could combine an acknowledgement scheme with the loss detection and correction. So you just, you know, the client side will wait for an ACK. If it times out and doesn't see the ACK, then it will retransmit in just the normal way you would in TCP or something like that. Okay, so let's go on to the next more slightly radical idea that I had. This is around abstracting blog names away from the station name. So The first thing is, maybe we've got a station that wants to run two different blogs, say news in English and news in Spanish. So we've got a station here, K7 MNO, and they're running two blogs. Now that's the first thing. So if you had blog names, you could switch between the blogs even though you're addressing the same station. You could still cope with stations that have a single blog and they don't use a blog name, so you could have a default. I think that's all possible. But the other thing that's probably more interesting to me is the fact that if you wanted international span for this, obviously you're going to have to carry this information in multiple places. So, for example, news in English might be carried on the East Coast and the West Coast of the US by me in the UK and by someone else in Delhi, you know, and you'd simply have, my idea is on the right hand side of the client where you normally have a list of stations that have been heard. In this case, you'll have a list of blogs, and when you want to go for connect to a blog, or you want to get information for a blog, it would simply go for the station that has the strongest signal. So that way you've got two benefits here. You're splitting the load, so you could run multiple blogs. Even you could run 5 copies of News English on the East Coast if you wanted to. You could run 5 copies of News English, each on different bands, you know, one on 10, one on 20, one on 40, even, you know, some VHF is possible. So there's a distinct advantage there. Similarly, we've got someone in India, you know, in Delhi, who's got a blog called Cricket, and someone in Australia is serving up the entries from that blog. So it would be easy for us to devise a synchronization mechanism between these blogs. We could equally, someone in Argentina might want to take their news in Spanish, and then we've got someone, say, in the DRC who runs a blog, but his blog's just known by his station name. So you can see that using blog names as a layer on top of station name could give us a great deal of flexibility, allow us to run multiple copies of the same blog, and that allow a station to run multiple blogs. So before we go any further, we need to confirm that microblogging over JS8 is viable. And I think the only way we're going to do that is by playing with it and finding out, you know, I've given you my view on some of the challenges, but I think we need more eyeballs on this to determine whether this is a viable solution. I'm sorry that went on for such a long time, but I think we're at a stage, or I'm certainly at a stage, where I'm deciding, should I take this any further or not? So I was keen to present all of it to you and get your view. Thanks very much, and I hope we get to talk about this again soon.